All right, so what are we going to talk about today besides for cake? Cake is definitely a Jewish conversation, but we got to have something better than that. Any questions that have come up over the last month and change?
No, I had one last month of the cake.
You don't, oh, you told, did I write it down? I thought I told you I should write it down.
We were talking about it last night. We went out with people, we were talking about tzedakah. When someone's on the street, there was a guy with a sign, help me, and his wife is there. I think it's his wife and two kids.
Oh,
on
I
the
see.
street.
Over by Fry's on 90th and
No,
oh,
this was.
they were over there. I guess.
Never seen family. I've only ever seen a person.
I've seen family like at near us, there's a Sprouts, like a woman with two kids on the floor.
Right.
Okay, oh, about,
Question is, we were discussing tzedakah. Do you just give it because they're asking? Or should we not give it and give it to an organization that could help them? Or does it-
okay, so, right. Okay, very good question. So just to repeat this and add some details. So charity, tzedakah, says that if somebody is in need, you help them. Now, let's say you see someone panhandling, to use that word. And in Arizona now, there's a big campaign. The first time I saw it was in Scottsdale, but I see it in Phoenix too now. It says it's okay to say no to panhandlers. Direct your money towards an organization that supports them. So the Jewish thing that I've always learned, at least growing up, was if somebody asks you, you don't say no. Like if they stuck out their hand, you give them. However, are there times that you can say no? And your no is going to be helpful. So that's how I always look at this. I teach this to my kids. I'm like, these people want money, but I don't know where they're spending their money. So the easy way, and I'll take your thoughts on that. And then I know you have a question. So if you have comments on this though, and then is either keep water bottles in your car. You can keep $5, $10 meal cards, whatever it is that you feel will be kind of the easy medium where you don't feel like you're supporting an addiction, but you're helping them. And then you'll find their true colors. If they don't want their meal, I've seen people say no. You know what I mean? But on that note, when somebody does ask, it's important to like, you want to be the merciful one. You want to be that person you're in a situation to help. So it is very tricky, especially with panhandlers, knowing that the homelessness in Arizona that they just shared is, I think, second in the entire country, is mostly, at least what I've heard, not from that news article. That news article is yesterday. Is mostly addiction, mental health.
Yeah.
It's not real people who are down on their luck and have tried. They're not here. So it's a totally different beast when you see these people. Arizona does have shelters. Arizona does have services for them. Clearly, these people know it because at night you don't see them, right? They're going to the shelter or they're going to, of course they do.
That's what
But by day you're kicked out of shelter.
oh yeah,
So that's
they go to the library.
I won't forget this. In November, I went to court to be a witness in like a crime against our menorah from 2 years ago. And I'm driving 8th Avenue, I think it was, because I'm coming down either Madison. I don't remember what street I was coming down. There's like barbecues happening 8 a.m. in the morning at the homeless encampments. It's very sad to see that. And it was quite shocking to me. I'm never driving that street. But I told it to somebody, I said, well, the shelter is literally a block away from there. So they all want to be close enough, but they don't want to be in the shelter. It's like it's sad, right? I mean, if you talk about, in the bigger news, they talk about San Francisco, but really it's happening everywhere.
It's like,
Yeah, you want to add to that?
My dad years ago, some guy said he was hungry. But he was hungry. My father took him to the local luncheonette, said to the guy, whatever he wants, put it on my tab.
Right.
And the guy had money. We're very grateful because he really was hungry. It was not,
Judy, you want to add something?
I'm hungry, but I'd rather have the money. My father would not give the money.
Right.
Yeah, I heard a story like that. Man came across someone begging in the street and asked for money. He said, "No, I'll take you over to McDonald's and I'll buy you a hamburger." And then went.
He did go. So you want to add something to that on the?
I've had experiences with all different kinds of things. And at first, it's very, very difficult to say no to somebody.
Right.
Those calls come up. Needed, but one time I took this guy and this was in the House of Jesus. I mean, it was amazing. He was at that corner. And because he wanted the money. He knew it was an addiction. Now, my uncle, may he rest in peace, he was an alcoholic. He got burned very badly when he started drinking. And doctors all said that you have to let them hit rock bottom before they will want to be helped. If they were dead.
Right. We're talking about charity for those of you who just joined on Zoom, Paula and Karen. And if you have to help people who are homeless on the corner asking, or can you ignore them on the Jewish side of that?
You know, police always tell you to give to the social services. Help.
But they don't want those services. That's
Well, some do and some don't. I could come out of a supermarket and I bought this nice big organic bread. There was a woman there and I said to her, I said, would you like this bread? And she said, then she could see she was mentally ill. And she refused to take it. She says, I have enough. She was just sitting there.
Yeah.
As I remember it, I think it's in Leviticus and in the book of Ruth, two places where you say you're supposed to leave 10% of your field for the poor to come and harvest. The way I read it, it says that you leave it for the poor to come and harvest. But that implies that the poor have some responsibility in the process.
To come and get it.
To come and get it, to grind the wheat into flour, or to do, but it's not my responsibility to grind the wheat into flour, to make the bread, to slice bacon, to slice it and put the jam on it and give it to them.
So there's two parts to
What
this.
responsibility does the recipient of the tzedakah, if they're able, have toward putting themselves in a position where they don't have to take it anymore?
So there's two parts to this charity part. What you're referring to is the charity of the fields, which mean if I'm in my harvest season, I drop something or I leave the corners, right? So they can come and get it and use it for their own homes. But what about the person who's traveling through town and goes door to door, knocks on the door and asks for money? That's a different, now you're talking about money, you're not talking about produce or harvest. So that's a different scenario. But yeah, and the field one, I have no responsibility to go grind it up. This is more like they'll be able to collect something, make some flour, food in their own home.
But I'm talking about people who need help because they're not working. Okay, and you give them either through cash or through buying things for them or through an organization that feeds them. What responsibility do they have to go and develop the skills so they can earn the money to pay?
well, some people are.
No, these are good questions, actually. I remember reading a Jewish text course on this, which I didn't bring the text here. But if you help someone and they don't want to help themselves, it says you only have to give them the bare minimum.
The what?
The bare minimum.
Oh, they're
Just that they live. You don't have to make them comfortable. On the other hand, somebody who's down on their luck and is trying their best and their business is failing and all the expenses they have in their life, you treat it slightly differently. Our goal is to give them their dignity. So it says that if somebody who is very wealthy becomes poor, the goal of the community is to maintain their lifestyle, which is a very strong statement. Now, maintain their lifestyle doesn't mean that you have to send them to the Bahamas on vacation, but you're giving them that they don't have to sell their house. They have to do that on their own kind of schedule, if you know what I mean. That it shouldn't look like they've literally fallen to the gutter. So there is an obligation as a community to give, but if you see that somebody is not helping themselves, they're just taking, then the Jewish law would say, give them the bare minimum. Now, it does also say just something very interesting, that even the poor have an obligation of charity. So I always find that quite fascinating. A responsibility of charity as well. Yeah. So you were gonna add something? No.
We had a situation when I was in Chicago in the early nineties. You know, it was the big recession. And was the first time it impacted the Jewish community as heavily as it did, because the discrimination of the large companies had disappeared to a great extent for the Jews. When these big companies had the layoffs, it really impacted the Jewish community. So I came up with an idea, and it started out with 5 synagogues. We had everybody who was looking for a job, whether they had been laid off, whether they just got out of school, to send their resume in with a 4-line description that summarized it. We assigned a number code to each one and mailed it to the members of those 5 congregations, wound up being 50 congregations.
Do you think everyone was helping everyone get a job?
All I was saying to you is, if you're a lawyer and you're a member of my show and you get this letter, you don't know who it is, but that's a source of potential candidates for you and for your clients.
I like that.
Now, it so happens we found 2,000 people jobs. But there were people who came to those meetings when we had a professional search individual who talked to them. People came to the meeting, walked out, and never did a thing. I always felt, hey, if you're not willing to put in some effort,
You gotta let them do their work.
I don't have any more responsibility anymore.
There is definitely, for those of you who are familiar with this, Maimonides talks about the different levels of charity, and one of them definitely is that you give the person a job rather than money, right? So don't give them a handout, say, here, start a business, I'll give you a loan for it, etc. So there's a lot of dignity in that. But actually, that's pretty amazing. Every community should have that.
I've tried to do
I
it
mean,
here.
not even to connect it to recessions. I think it's an amazing
I
thing.
try to do it here, can't get anyone to go along with it. But as far as I remember, the highest form of charity is to help someone get back on their feet so they can take care of their family.
Right.
And that-
Teach a person to fish, that's the classic.
There are charities that actually list themselves that way, that like particularly with countries in Africa where they'll buy them a goat or a sheep or something like
Right,
that.
right. Instead of just giving them.
They can make a living rather than sending $10 or
Right.
something like that.
It's very successful.
Yeah, you want to add something, Jean?
So I did a lot of volunteer work in Ukraine, in the former Soviet Union. And one of the things we started was a micro enterprise fund. My specific thing was teaching people, women, become entrepreneurs, start businesses to escape abusive situations. And when you got a loan, and these people had no money to start a loan, you got a loan and you finally started to make money, you had to give 0.1%, 10%, whatever you could afford, back to support money for the next person to be able to get a loan. And it turned into an amazing thing. I had over 450 women start businesses.
Wow.
And it just kept going, but they had to pay. You have to give back something.
There's definitely, and I know you want to add something unless we pass on. There is definitely a Jewish teaching on tzedakah, is that we don't call it charity, even though in English we always translate it as charity. Tzedakah really comes from the word righteous or just. And the idea behind that is saying that all of the money that you have is God's. And God is the one who tells you what you should do with it and what your responsibilities with it are. So therefore, if someone needs money, it's not like you're taking of your money, you're giving. You're the banker for God. And there's a classic story I always it kind of gives a reality check to this, but there's a story a rabbi once had the follower of his that was really down on hard times, and he comes to the rabbi, he says, please, what can I need money, I have a daughter to marry off. You can imagine the story. I'm just adding some details, but basically he says, go to this and this follower of mine, here's a letter, and he's going to take care of you. Man opens up the letter, travels to that town, and the rabbi says, give this person, the holder of this letter, 200, whatever rubles or whatever it was. And the guy's like, 200 rubles? Crazy amount of money in those days. I'll give you 10. He says, no, the rabbi said that you're going to give me 200 rubles. So either 200 or nothing. He thinks for a minute, he gives, I'll give you 20. There's 200 or nothing. He gets up to 60 and he says, no way, I'm giving 200. Sorry. Takes his letter back, comes to the rabbi. And he says, listen, he didn't give me 200. So the rabbi takes the letter, crosses it off, puts a different name, and says, go to this person. That person was poor. Nowhere close to the wealth that this other guy had. But he sees a letter from the rabbi. It says, give this guy 200 rubles. So he quickly goes and borrows and pawns different things from their home, gives them 200 ruble. Comes back home, he doesn't know what to do with himself. There's no money. On his way home, there's like somebody who offers him like a business deal of something really cheap. The next morning, though, he hears that the Parrots or whoever it was of that town is looking for that specific material and paying, boatloads of money more than its value. And quickly, this person's fortune turns to the better. Slowly, the other guy, business deal after business deal after business deal, he starts losing all of his money. He realizes what happened. He said no to this guy. He comes to the rabbi. And he says, please, it's not fair. I get it that it was difficult to get 200, but why do I have to be poor? So he says, listen, before I was brought into this world, they said I was gonna be wealthy. I said, what do I need money for? I want to study, I'm gonna be a rabbi, whatever, this is obviously the metaphor of the story. Give it to one of my followers, and whenever I need it, I'll ask them for money. So he said, you were the person who got my wealth. I sent a message to take a withdrawal and you said no. So if you're not a good bank, I'm going to change it to Morgan Stanley or whatever, But I always think about that story. I don't know if the story is true or not, but the message is always the true idea of what tzedakah really is that God blesses each of us in our own ways with the financial situations that we're in. And when that situation arises where somebody requests of it, we realize that we're just an extension of God's hands to these people. So that's why charity, when you talk about like the poor person at the corner, especially when you understand how God looks at charity, it's not charity, it's tzedakah, it's the right and the just thing to do. God blessed you in all that you do, and now your obligation is to do what God wants with that money as well. It kind of makes you step back for a second. You see a family asking for money on the corner, and you don't want to miss the opportunity to be God's hands of grace. On the other hand, you understand that this isn't just a simple person asking for money. So that's where you could say, okay, I'm going to make sure that they're supported, but I'm giving it to a shelter. If you need something immediately right now, here is water, here is food, here is maybe $10 chump change if that's something that you think would be helpful. But most of these people are professional collectors. So that's where it's a little bit of a very difficult thing to weigh. And nobody should ever tell you not to give.
Right.
On the other hand, how you give, that's where the conversation
Or
happens.
shouldn't you just give because they asked, and what they do with it, it's a dilemma.
I saw a video recently, then I'll take your comment. There was a person who he just walks into, I don't know what city it is. This is a little video clip I saw. He puts a big poster board. It says, if you're homeless, please take a meal on me. Each card is clearly a gift card to some restaurant. So you see one guy come by, he looks homeless, pulls one off, another guy. And at the end, you see a guy who does not look homeless at all. He takes the last 5. It's like, there's still people who, for all we know, the benefit of the doubt is that he's going to take it to homeless people. But at its own perspective, it doesn't look that way. But that's the idea. This charity is obviously a very big part of everything that we believe in, especially when we truly believe that our blessings come from God. And one person being well off and another person being poor is because of God. And it's our job to fix that balance. That's really what God tells us.
Some of these people some of them look more fit than others. I mean, some of them are really filthy and. But my thought is, everybody's begging for people to come work for them. And it's easier just to stand on
Right.
the street corner. Give a man
So-
fish and teach him to fish.
Right, there is this theory that during COVID with all the handouts, less people worked because the money was just on your table, and I'm sure it's true, by the way. Yeah,
Two points. Number one, I believe that Jewish law says you're not supposed to give so much that it detracts from your ability to take care of your own family.
right, correct.
And for people standing on the corner, don't have enough food. I happen to know because the jail group I belong to, every month, a bunch of us go down to St. Mary's Food Bank and pack boxes for people who need it.
Right.
So, I mean, you see people driving up there.
You're saying, how are they meant to give charity on their part? Is that what you're getting at, or?
No, two separate points. Number one, you're not supposed to give of your own so much that.
Oh, okay, so I'll answer that point first. So the Torah says 10%. That's always been the tithing. But it does say up to 1/5. And then it says, so that's the standard that people give either 10% of their earnings. It doesn't say of your wealth, by the way, of your earnings. And then up to 1/5 if you want to give even more. On the other hand, it says if somebody's going through a very grave illness, it says then you give charity without any calculations. Why? Because the idea is that there's two parts of it. Charity, it says, saves from death. That's number one. So it's a very powerful mitzvah. But the additional part to it is one of the things that you find, I always like this in the Torah, there are a couple times where it says that if you do this, you're considered dead. One of them is poor. One of them, I think, was loss of eyesight. Isaac could not see it. In the Torah, it says it was as if he was dead. Obviously, he was alive. These are things that are very difficult to live in those situations. So another idea of when a person is really going through that most terrible time with illness says, if you give out, you just splurge your treasures, as they say, your spoils. That is like, you'll get a new lease on life, like you're a new person. That's when it says you don't have to calculate. But yeah, it does say that you're supposed to be able to live too. There are people that we know throughout our history, though, in the sense of Jewish stories, that have clearly given more than 10%. So there's.
You figure the time and effort that people put in as against, it's not 10% of what somebody spends.
I thought you were going to ask pre-tax or after tax.
For example, and my own wife, we had a new Torah written for our temple. She spent 6 weeks, 12 hours a day needle pointing the cover of that house.
Right, yeah, the mantle.
I mean, that's certainly charity.
Right,
But
I'm
how
just
do you-
thinking the IRS for a moment here. No, because the labor is not something, like they have all these rules too. They have the same question that you have about, what's taxable and what's not taxable. There's a tax on food, but not on labor, if you get a caterer and things like that. So I totally know where you're getting at with that. I know that. Let's just talk about the money side first. Money itself, 10% is charitable. The question of pre-tax and post-tax is its own question. Most people will agree it's after taxes because it's not your money. You didn't get it. Others will be before tax, but those are like the small things. In the sense of that is charity. You're doing charity when you are giving up your time to create a beautiful Torah piece. But that doesn't take away from the financial side of that. That's a totally different conversation.
And there are people who can't afford to give financially.
Right, so they'll do this. 100%, yes.
And they do it.
So is that charity or is that kindness? Do you know what I mean?
I think that's
It's
charity.
the same.
Somebody who, for example, can't afford to pay the dues for the temple.
Then volunteer.
They
I agree,
volunteer and
100%. That is charity, but
To me,
it's still
that-
a different charity.
But it's still
Of
charity.
course,
and
of course.
So to me, it fulfills
A mitzvah.
that obligation to give by contributing to the community.
100%.
doing well for the people.
But let's say that person makes money this year, they also should be giving 10% of their earnings. So it would be independent. Maybe it's a little bit so they feel like they can give a lot in the sense of the in-kind, which is how I view that. But yeah, they're both charity, they're just different.
So,
It's a mitzvah to make a shul beautiful. It's a mitzvah to write a Torah, right? That's how we all put a letter in the Torah is the mitzvah of writing a Torah. So just a side note here, and then if any of you here have not ever participated in writing in a Torah, we can help each other, but we can facilitate literally a letter. It's for free, or you give $1, whatever you want, towards the writing of the Torah. And now you have fulfilled the mitzvah of writing a Torah. So it's one of the mitzvot in the Torah. So again, that's a side note. After this, we can talk about that. But the idea is those are definitely mitzvot, they're kindnesses. But charity is its own thing. The financial side is one thing, giving of yourself and being, kind of the input into a community, milat chesed or milat chasadim, is a separate parallel. They're also a kindness, also a charitable act. But talking about money is its own thing. Right? 10% of earnings is 10% of earnings. That's the idea.
So is that, don't shoot the messenger, but is that like tithing in the church? I mean, it's a similar concept.
So I'll tell you, I always like this question. It's the reverse. They should be asking, is there tithing in the church like our tithing in the Torah? Right? Our Torah is way before Christianity existed. So the answer is yes, but I'm flipping the question. So yeah, our Torah teaches about tithings. And I'm going to just share this. I'm sure many of you see this. There are definitely some Christian groups that put a lot more effort into the 10% than many of us do in the calculations. To use the Mormon church, for example, I know they are very on top of their tithings. That doesn't mean Jews are not. Like as a whole, when you see they talk about it, they're very on top of that, whether it's part of their rules or not. If somebody checks in on them, if they have a finance department, I don't know those details. But as a whole, I always hear about their charitable giving. They're very on top of it, like each family. And they also take care of those in their parishes that are not able to. And Jews do that very well too, by the way. I'm not comparing. We know Jews are, by percentage, we're probably the most charitable in the sense of large charities. So it's not a comparison. I'm saying just since you're asking as a, in the sense of what do they call it? The offering? Yeah, but they go around with their,
The basket.
yeah, I'm saying the point is as Jews as a whole, we're very charitable. We do care about each other. It's ingrained. So it's been for generations. Yes.
I went to the American temple in Mesa, the Mormon temple, and afterwards we were sitting outside and discussing with some of the Mormons, and they just very willingly give that amount. It's not that they have to pull to get it. It's such a cloistered family in there. They do everything within there. So it's a different mindset, but I did have a question, maybe somebody can answer. I've heard that you have to have a home address to be employed. So if you go into a store and you're homeless, you can't get a job. I'd like to know if anyone knows if that's true or not.
That's generally true.
I know there's something else, interestingly.
Yeah.
So people who get out of prison, and I'm taking your question or comment. People who get out of prison, the most difficult thing that they need is an ID. And there are organizations that literally work to help get an ID because you can't get a job without an ID, that's for sure. And that's kind of what gives you your freedom. So I don't know about the address part, but the ID part I know is very important, and now I'll take you.
Just a comment, it must be a priority setup, because if you give the wrong address even though it's legitimate, sometimes it's much more important to give to your neighbor. And I think it says,
Yes.
the poor of your town comes first.
Right.
And this is very important today, because today it's a world. You give to Ukraine, you give to who knows what. Maybe that's the wrong thing to do.
Right.
Maybe Israel, for example, must come first, not last. Second comment, the Torah also has an interesting behavior requirement. When you cut your wheat, you shouldn't collect what's left over. You must leave it for the poor. All kinds of various agricultural behaviors. And you do charity by helping the poor, ignoring the story of Ruth in particular. Example. You ignore your own need or your own benefit. No, it's not a major, maybe not be a major contribution, but it's the type of behavior that the Torah requires.
Right. So that's actually, we started with that. That's what you had mentioned about leaving the corners of the field and the things that you drop. But I'm going to talk about the first thing that you mentioned. So there is the Jewish pyramid of charity, is what I call it. Who comes first and who's last? And that is what you had touched on. I'm going to talk about that in a second. The other thing is that one of the only places in the Torah that you find that God guarantees a return on something that he asked us to do is charity. It's a guarantee by God. It says, if you do it, you're guaranteed to gain more from that. In fact, there's a story, and then I'm going to touch the pyramid part. There's a story I always love. A person in Brazil, this is a story of the Chabad Rebbe, that if you give charity, you're supposed to have more. So at the end of the year, he wrote into the Rebbe that his profits were down that year or something. So, and again, I don't know all the details, but I always like the punchline of this. He said, check your books again. It's impossible that if you gave charity, you didn't make more back. And they reviewed their books and they were off. Now, obviously, this is one story, but the message is what I always take from it. There's like a guarantee. If you give charity, you're going to reap the benefits of it. It's not why we give the charity, but if you needed that extra push, that's why it's written. Right? Because a lot of us, it's very difficult to take your hard-earned money, like you were saying earlier. It's like you work hard, and then you're just giving 10% to people who you don't think necessarily have tried their best on their own to make ends meet. So with that knowledge, God says, I promise you, you will see the blessings of the charity, of your charitable giving. Now, going back to the pyramid, this is always a difficult conversation. How are you supposed to give charity? So it does say the poor of your own city are first. Even before that is your own family. So if you have family that lives somewhere else, you give them first. Then your own city, and then you begin the structure of your country, your people, which would be Israel. Then you start talking about others. Now, that doesn't mean that people are going to, first of all, listen to that structure, and maybe they gave 90% here and 10% there. That's not a problem. Or maybe it is, right? Maybe you only have to look at this place. So there's definitely, those are things that you really have to talk to your significant other, how you want to give it, what are our values, what organizations can I give to here? Just to add to this, let's say you gave to an organization and then you find out they're not so good. They're not really giving the money out the way they said they are. That doesn't take away from the mitzvah of giving charity, which is always a nice thing to know. It's not based on how they used it, but based on that you gave it. So here is the thing that I always love. You dropped $5 in the street one day, you pulled it out of your pocket and lost it, and a poor person picks it up. You had no intent to give charity with that money. If a poor person picked it up, you have given charity because the action has dictated the deed. But it works in the reverse too. The action dictates the deed, that even if you gave and it wasn't somebody who actually needed it in the end, they were pulling a con. You've also fulfilled the mitzvah of charity. You don't have to say, oh gosh, I just gave $1,000 that went to nothing and I got to give another. It doesn't work like that. So we do have an understanding God in the sense of giving. God understands that sometimes you're going to be part of a Madoff scam, sadly. Hopefully not. I'm just using that as the example. You want to?
A couple of things. One, I've found that I get phone calls occasionally to give to a charity. The first question I ask is, are you a fundraiser? Because in many cases, the charity gets a very small part. That if that's the case, one, I don't give. the other
Right, you're saying it could be a 60-40 split?
When I give to charities, let's say to the Helen Keller Fund or other things, Salvation Army or whatever. I check with Charity Navigator and see how they rate these places, because I have one outfit that has sent me little presents type of thing, in the mail. And I look them up and they're one of the worst rated charities going, because people tend to give them because they sent something.
Interesting.
But like 10% or 15% of the money really goes for charity. I'm looking for people who are giving 70, 80 or 90% of their money to charity.
Also, on that note, and not to go into this conversation, but I think that when people look at the Red Cross, I think they say like their overhead is like 80 to 90% of it. So I'm not mixing in on that. I would never, they definitely do good things when there are disasters. So people have to make their decisions. In the end of the day, the Red Cross is going to be bringing 1,000 beds or 2,000 beds plus food, plus a mobile hospital. So I don't mix into that part. That's its own conversation. But I do also understand the questions about, like, if there's another organization that's doing less, you might choose this over that.
Yeah.
But the fact is, we do need the Red Cross. So I always know about that struggle.
It's interesting, when we were youngsters, I'm including you, you're still a youngster. Our families, the vast majority of the charity was given to Jewish charities because we were excluded
From all the others.
from other organizations. In today's world, Jews are on the board of the symphony and the opera and the ballet and the big generic charities and non-religious charities. So Jewish giving has continued to be very high,
Not diversified.
but less to Jewish charities because their discrimination has.
So I always think about that, just slightly using a different kind of perspective on that. Number one is it's all obviously a value system that has shifted. But I also appreciate what you added, that it was more like you couldn't get anything out of that charity, so why support that charity? I think there was something else as well. We had a much more Jewish value system, so you gave to Jewish causes. On the other hand, today the values of many people have kind of moved away from Judaism, but charity has still remained an important value. So they're still giving charity, but not necessarily to the Jewish cause. And then there's something else which I always think is true. There's an ad on the radio, and I'm sure it's on TV as well. It's about this idea that children who finally get a car and need to get insurance, they just do the insurance that their parents use. Oh, my father has State Farm, I'll try with State Farm. Instead of really trying to understand why, what, and when. And then slowly they become more enlightened and they say, why am I spending $2,000 when the same insurance coverage from Allstate or whatever other company is $1,000? So I think that's also happening in the Jewish community right now. There is always the status quo. To use federation as an example, not this or that. I'm saying in general, it's a big pot. That's the idea of the federation. Give us the money, we're going to determine where the money is best allocated. That's the federation model. With that knowledge, though, the way we give though has shifted. People want to be more involved in where it's going. They say, well, I don't know that I value this part of what they're giving to. So they'll start choosing others. And that opens up a lot of opportunities. I'm not saying what's right or wrong, by the way. They say, if you don't like how the federation gives, join their board. That's that's part of the way that you can impact that. But the idea is that you are seeing that change within Jewish alphabet organizations. If the federation here, let's say, gives a certain amount to Israel and gives a certain amount to overseas, and you don't like the ratios, that's a conversation that you can talk with them directly and say, hey, I want my allocated money to go specifically to whatever. You can do that. You weren't able to do that always, right? That has shifted. So there is that.
Instead of giving the federation,
You're saying give it to the symphony.
I'm going to give it to the symphony.
No, I understand that. I think that has to do with Jewish values. Less Jewish values in certain homes determine what's important to them. So arts is very important to them, but religious Jewish life is not. That's what I mean by that.
Or they just decide that they're now they go to the symphony all the time. And they decide that they're gonna split their money, if they were giving 10%,
Right.
they're splitting it up.
I'll give you the best example. You probably have friends like this, and I'm sure others in this room do. All your life, you've been involved in a synagogue. You made sure you paid your membership, and then you moved, right? So you were in Chicago all your life, or Philadelphia, or wherever it was. So your value was, I have to support the local Jewish synagogue. You come to Arizona, you're disconnected now from Pittsburgh after 5 years or whatever is, I'm just throwing a city. And so, and here you didn't connect to a shul. You don't feel the connection there anymore. Some people still do, don't get me wrong. I know people who still remain with their subscriptions to whatever the Jewish news of their town was. But many people start feeling that disconnect, and here they didn't connect to that, so they shift how they spend their money. It's kind of like a later stage in life reevaluation of what's important to you, and that happens. Right? I'm not saying what's right or wrong. I'm saying this is the natural fact of how we as human beings constantly evolve, and that is where you need your value system to guide you. That's where you need. Okay, we have a Torah that says it doesn't mean you can't support the symphony, by the way. But what should be at the top of my priorities? And from there, I'll determine what I'm giving out. If you're going to have that difficult conversation with yourself and say, why am I giving even 1% to the symphony when there's a poor person in Israel that could use my 1%? That's your conversation to be had. I'm not mixing in on that. But it's a very important conversation to be had. Right? Each one of us to reflect on what we're supporting and how we're supporting it. But in the end of the day, that's why we have a Torah with values of how I should be giving my charity. And if you aren't sure how to do it, and this year you're reevaluating, I can find a Jewish article for you to kind of give you a better understanding of that, to help you make those
But
decisions.
the Torah is a guide.
The Torah is a guide.
It's a guide, it's not a.
It does 10% of your charity, of your money, that's not, and then how you spend it,
How you spend it is,
right? What's considered a charity?
Yeah.
The arts, I don't think, by the way, is considered a charity, just to put, meaning in the sense of the Torah. I could be wrong, but I don't know that
It's
that's.
just a company, they have to be supported.
No, I understand that.
That's,
In the United States, they could be a 501c3. That's not what I mean. I meant, is that considered charitable in Jewish law, is what I'm talking about. Again, you could give beyond. You don't have to stop at 10%. If you want to do, I'm just using this as a good example. If somebody has that comfort in wealth, they can totally do 10% and do exactly to Jewish organizations, institutions, however they find fit. And then beyond 10%, start supporting all the extra things. And then there's no question.
You've got Warren Buffett and Bill Gates.
There are plenty, again, but it's more than that. There are plenty of people who give more than 10%. That's a fact.
there was a guy on television, Jewish guy, he's made billions, literally billions. And to him, Marcus, to him, he can give millions. It wouldn't affect his
Right.
lifestyle or his family or anything. And why not? That's what he said. Why
Right.
not?
You want to?
I have concern about the case. I'm not sure it's Israeli or just the Federation. For a period of time, they refused to support the villages beyond the Green Line. I had problems donating to an organization.
Right. I see what you're saying. Who has determined?
Correct, had a policy of not supporting it. I didn't, I stopped. I had something with the Jewish Week also, I stopped donating to the Jewish Week, all that stuff. I need to know not just whom they are giving, whom they're not giving.
Right.
Because sometimes whom they're not giving, I would like to give,
Right.
rather than,
So this is the value system that each one of us goes through when we support institutions or organizations. I think that's a new thing in a good way, right? That we're more involved in who we give to. We want it to be more meaningful to us and of course, meaningful to the recipients. So that's a good thing. I think each one of us probably, hopefully, questions who we give to. Sometimes we give because somebody asked. And sometimes we give because we saw what they've done. And sometimes we gave because our friend pressured us to. Right, that's part of the giving, yeah.
I went to high school with Estee Lauder, Leonard Lauder graduated in the January class, I got Jewish class. And Ronald Lauder is World Jewish Congress. And their wealth, interestingly enough, I've spoken to Leonard and because of reunion type things. But their wealth, Ronald is a poor brother. He's worth about $5 billion. Leonard is worth about 37 to 40 billion dollars. So if they give a little extra to charity, it doesn't really
Right.
affect them much in any way, as opposed to, the guy who's, working as a
Right.
butcher in a butcher shop.
Might even be a tax benefit to give.
The extra, right. By the way, there is something to that. I don't know if you were gonna add to this as well, but two people give charity. One gives, let's say, $100 and one gives $1 million. And for one, it was easy. And for the $100, it was that much more difficult. And of course, when you talk about the way we, as the outsiders, and I'm sure the way God looks at it, is like the guy who struggled to give 100, it changes how he lives his life. That's definitely greater and more worthy of praise than the billionaire who gave $1 million. So there's something to that. I think that for most of us who are following kind of current events, it's quite fascinating to watch. I think her name is Mackenzie Bezos. Is that her first name? The Amazon founder.
Yeah.
I mean, she is it Mackenzie?
Yeah, I believe it.
She is giving out charity like tremendous amounts. Believe it or not, it's not changing her lifestyle. I mean, like we know that. She's a billionaire, but she is giving more money in the last 3 years than probably most charitable individuals. And you're like, it's a big deal for us to watch. But to her lifestyle is staying the same. She can still do everything she wants to do. So, yeah.
The most successful universities in collecting and the money from alumni are those that treat the $25 giver the same way they treat the $250 million giver. The perfect example of that is, what's the name, the former mayor of New York? Bloomberg. He graduated from Johns Hopkins. They came to him, they gave him a check for 25 hours. And in articles I've read, he said they treated him like he was one of the biggest givers in the world. Since then, he's given over $2 billion.
Huge job. Wow.
So it's not the
Right.
amount that's given, the fact that it is given. And also, they have also found the people who give once, you get someone to give the second time and the third time, you got a contributor for life.
Were you a professional fundraiser at some point? Just checking. I read something, it's funny, no, because I read something similarly about the Boston Zoo. That I think someone gave them monthly $5. But what their point of this that I read was the monthly commitment showed that this woman cares. When she passed away, she gave them millions of dollars. But on her monthly, you'd think, what's $5? $5 sounds like nothing.
Yeah, but if you have a lot of $5 givers.
No, that's for sure. But I'm saying like the commitment, I'm talking about like if somebody gives more than once or twice, it shows that they're committed, which is a really powerful statement. Yeah,
It's not the pennies, it's the value.
it's the value, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, of
Take
course.
a week back, 'cause it's
Sure.
not like on great views. These people that are coming out of jail, why don't they have an ID? Don't they still have their license, their library card? their-
So, well, this is a great question. I don't know that I'm qualified to answer all of it. I could just share what I am sitting in those meetings. The Governor's Council for Recidivism. I forgot what it was called, but this was Governor Ducey's time. It's probably like 5 or 6 years ago. I sat on a meeting and I'm like, I'm not for this. There's other people who work specifically with prisoners, but I got a great appreciation for it. So there's an AI thing. I saw this in the news last week, I think, that it can predict if a person who gets out of prison will end up back in prison and how long it will take. Right, based on race, based on family, based on where they come from, crime, et cetera, et cetera. The interesting thing with that is that the first thing that has to happen when a person gets out of prison is usually they'll go to a halfway house. Those are people who are helping them transition from a structured life where the morning had breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and work schedule that they gave in the prisons. And now you're free. It's like, what do you do with your freedom? If it's not structured, it's not a good freedom. So the first thing is they make sure that they have an ID. Some of them have, but most people who have committed a crime were already, we're not talking about white collar criminals who were with offices and families and just did something really stupid with finances, for example. But more about the burglar and there's a reason why they're resorting to crime, because they're not doing well in the typical world of life. So they come out, they don't have an ID, they need an ID, but it's difficult to get an ID if you don't have any other documents to prove who you are. And step number one to getting an ID is you need some identification. So that's where they help. And then they'll help them get a job, some of them. A lot of these are Christian organizations, which to me it's kind of like, when I sat through these, I said, wow, it's amazing what they're doing. But their biggest goal is to make people believe in Jesus and help them. So when you have Jewish inmates who get freed, which thank God we don't have a lot of Jewish inmates, it's still like, you just want to make sure they don't get caught up on all the other stuff, but they're going to be happy to help anyway. So their first thing is find ID. I was on a ride along a couple of weeks ago and we got called by a hotel that when they were cleaning up the room, they found drug paraphernalia. So the officer comes, he opens up the box that it's all in, and I guess they say criminals catch themselves. Inside the box is an inmate's identification card. Right? So it's like you just gave yourself away. But the point is why did he have that ID? Like, why didn't he throw that out? So the officer was telling me, he's like, this could be his only ID. Like, he hasn't gotten a license. He might not be allowed to drive. He didn't even get a state issued ID. And this is what he walks around with if he needs to show who he is. So it is a difficult process to get back into life. But there are some great organizations that want to help.
How about new immigrants? When they come to this country?
Hold on, new immigrants with proper visas and passports, or ones that come through the border without ID?
Ones that they're busing all over, putting.
Right, so that's
They
difficult.
can't get a job, they're not allowed to work.
But a lot of those have an ID. It's just in America, it's not good enough because they carried some sort of a license or a passport or something.
From the other country.
Yeah, just they didn't come through the normal channels of, or ports of entry, I should say. But they have something. It's just, it's not worth its value over here.
So they're not allowed to.
Illegal immigrants,
They can't work for certain.
there's a very big, I'm going to say debate within the states. Should they be allowed to be issued ID or driver's licenses, right? They're here already. Should we make their life miserable? Or should we give them those? So this way, at least we know they're driving a vehicle, operating it legally. I'm not mixing in on that, by the way, that's above my pay grade. But I know that this is a big debate between states. Like Arizona has one way, you're going to find Democrat states are going to have a more lenient side of this. And if you ask me my opinion, if somebody is here and can get, let's say Utah, I don't know if Utah issues it, I'm using them as the example. It's probably worth it for them to get to Utah to get a license. So when they come back here and drive a car illegally, their car won't get towed for driving without a license. You know,
It's different laws. They should have to do the same test. I mean, when I came from Massachusetts here, I had to take a living test. I mean.
right. In other words, let's give them some more knowledge. Again, that's why I say it's above my pay grade. I don't comment on illegal or illegal immigration. That's not my.
How about the DACA kids? They're brought here illegally.
DACA kids.
They should be on a path to become citizens.
So DACA kids, I think, can get licenses. Because they were able to get.
I don't,
work-
they
They
don't,
can get work visas, so that's a different story.
they have a lot of problems. Yes.
No, 100%. I do think that everyone can agree, I hope, even people who are against every part of citizenship for illegals want it fixed. I don't know how each person looks at fixing the problem. I think we all agree No one wants people in limbo. That just doesn't,
Right, it's not right.
so I think hopefully we all agree on that.
It's awful to let them in.
I always believe, I've heard this from someone else, and I'm that in general, in the differences in America between parties and people who follow their parties, they all want what's best for their country. They only have differences of how to get to that. I'm not, again, that's without taking a side. I really believe that if somebody hated President Obama or hated President Trump, they do believe that those two presidents wanted what's best for the United States. They just don't believe that they're the right person, right? Depending on what side of the aisle you were on each president. They just didn't think they were the right person or they were the right party for that. But they do hopefully agree that they wanted what's best for the country.
The New York Times did a thing where they got about 400 or 500 people, Democrats, Independents, Republicans, very right wing, very left wing, the whole thing. And when they sat them down, they found out that other than the politics, they had a tremendous amount. And the people realized when they sat down, we have friends here that the first time I met this guy, I was arguing about Trump, and he's very staunch backer of Trump. And we've become close friends, you know, and
You're saying because you actually found a lot.
It's not the same, but our regular interests of, you know,
Right.
life are the same, you know, that type of thing.
I do want to just kind of end on the charity side with a different food for thought for a moment. You talk about universal health care, right? That was one of the big 2012 conversations. I think it was 2012 when we had Obamacare. That's another Jewish conversation of charity. Do we believe that as a community, we have to take care of those that are less fortunate and cannot afford health care? That's a charity or human dignity, things that we think are standards or not standards. The question is, how do we do that correctly? And that's where the politics gets involved. Like, you know, should you do it this way or that way? But no one wants to see people who can't afford it not being able to get that care. So our system does have a net. It does have a safety net. You know, if you're going to go to a hospital for emergency services, you're going to get taken care of, which is how all the illegals who do not have health insurance get taken care of. That's a Jewish thing, right? In Judaism, you have to take care of those that are less fortunate. But this is where the conversation comes in. What happens to somebody who's wealthy, who's not paying? And that
Congress.
Well, I'm not mixing it, but my point is that is where you talk about giving the bare minimum in Jewish standards. So like we talked about giving charity, giving people what they need. But if somebody doesn't help themselves, now we say, we only give you to survive. After that, you have to work. So charity is actually much bigger than just handouts for food. But charity is a very important conversation in general. And just to end again on this note, God says, test me. If you give, you'll see the benefits of that charitable giving in your own personal life. That's powerful. And again, like we said, it's only two times in the Torah that you find that God guarantees a return on investment. One of them is charity. So if there's any kind of, I'm going to say synopsis to this discussion, it's like what you added, that there is a pyramid to what you should give. What's more important? And those are the poor of your own city, the poor of your own family, and Jewish charities in general. And then you give out more. And to add what you were kind of brought in, if somebody wants to support causes that are not within the pyramid structure of what is most important at the top and less important at the bottom, but important, then go beyond the 10%. You're allowed to give more than 10%. And of course, if you have more detailed questions, I'm happy to find Jewish texts that give you more clarity or direction. If it's more of a practical question, I'm happy to kind of give you the guidance of where to research for it.
Will Rogers said that babies and Congress should be changed very frequently for the same reason.
I just have a comment. Sometimes
Sure.
you could donate to charity. You're not going to get back, but you're feeling about yourself.
Correct, but that's not, I agree with you, right? It says the giver receives more than the receiver, right? That feeling that you, But again, giving on the sense of the God idea of giving is that you're doing exactly what God asked you to do with the money that he blessed you with. So it's not even your money, it's kind of the perspective of it. But we're saying that God's promising to give you more than just good feelings. Right? To actually see real benefits from it. Not just that I felt good because I helped someone. Which is, if that's,
People that, to me, it would be enough.
which by the way, this is why charity is not the highest level of giving, because you might think that you're gonna get something in return, right? I'm gonna help somebody. I feel good helping that person, but maybe down the line, they're gonna help me. Today on the phone, we're having a major issue with our alarm system at the Chabad. There's another entity on the campus, a school that for some reason their alarm, when it goes off, they call and say Chabad has an alarm issue. And so we're getting billed for their false alarm. So today I spoke to the supervisor of the supervisor, who wasn't helpful to me. And like at a certain point, I'm like, I'm not getting anywhere. She doesn't want to help me. To me, it's like black and white. I got a letter from the other alarm company that says it goes to their alarm, like just put it on their bill. It's not working. So finally I said, listen, lady, I don't want to bother you for another 30 minutes if you can't help me. So if you can't help me, I'll just hang up. Then her tune changes. And she's like, yeah, she understands the synagogue. Her friend, somebody who she's very close to, works for Sinai Mortuary. I'm like, okay, now we're doing the Jewish geography here. She's not Jewish, but like, you know, if my connection to this woman, Vanessa at Sinai Mortuary, is why I'm nice to her so I can receive a benefit because of somebody else who knows her, that's not real charity, right? It's still charity, but that's with ulterior motives that, right? The greatest level of charity is when you don't expect anything in return. But you still need to give charity, even if you expect something in return. That's what I'm trying to say. Even if you have the worst motive behind it, the giving is a mitzvah.
The highest form of charity is when you give anonymously.
Right? Why?
But
Because you won't receive anything in return.
God doesn't know that.
Not from God. No, not from God, from the person that you gave to.
Right, but God's supposed to
God wants you to give.
make me better, so if I.
That's the God part of it. You can do it for God's ulterior motive. Although, yes, 100%, you can say you're not doing it for that. Each person has to do their motivation. That's how I look at that. In the end of the day, the gift of giving is the gift. When you did the mitzvah, you did the mitzvah. How and why you did it.
Well, that goes back to the question, the poor guy on the street, and he asks you for money.
So I answered that question with a Jewish answer. Either. Should you support that person? Again, going back to Jewish law, it says if somebody asks you for charity, you should always give. But again, it doesn't have to be money.
So it's your judgment.
Yeah, it's your judgment.
whether you're giving-
You can start carrying $5 McDonald's gift cards. Or $2. I think you can get a meal in McDonald's for $2. I think I thought they have hamburgers for $1. I have to start looking at their ads again. You know, you're gonna laugh. The only time I've really been through a drive-through here for any of the fast foods. No, so I went on a ride along with this guy and he, goes into the drive-through for the hammer. It's like the first time I'm like looking, I always, in the ads, they look like the hamburger was like so small. I'm like, oh, that's why they're cheating you.
I have a cousin who was on the board of McDonald's of Canada for many, many years and never ate a McDonald's.
Never.
The first time he ate a McDonald's, they opened the kosher McDonald's in Jerusalem.
That's what he tried.
Time he ever ate a McDonald's
Hopefully it was
and sat on the board for years.
never tried it. That's funny.
We couldn't, they weren't kosher.
I know there was an excitement for me when we were in Argentina, the first time I had a kosher McDonald's.
Do you have an ice cream cone?
They don't do, what is it called, McFlurries?
No, they make ice cream.
No, not in the kosher McDonald's.
No.
I think it's called a McFlurry, their milkshake. But anyways, the idea is we have a mitzvah to be charitable. How you do it, why you do it, it doesn't make a difference. The action is the most important. And that's,
So what do you want? What can I give you?
I didn't know. Go back to that corner and give the. All right, I have a comment here. Is giving to the people on the street that are not really in need but are paid beggars, is that charity? Good question, Paula. We said giving, if you don't know if they need it or not, is still giving. But you are allowed to, like we said, give the bare minimum just in case, or direct them to a charity that can check them out for bigger gifts. So you'll give them just, okay, I know you need a meal right now, here's that money. What happens afterwards if you're going to give more because you really think they're down on their luck or not? That is where you can start asking more questions. That's how I've always learned that. So, you know, right now in Arizona, just to use this example, it happens in many Jewish communities. You have random Jewish people, religious looking, that go to synagogues. They'll show up in the morning, or maybe even at your door if you're for some reason on a list of theirs, and they ask you for money and you don't know what they're asking for. So in certain larger cities, they have what they call, I don't know what they call it, but I'm calling it the tzedakah board. And a guy who comes to, let's say, Toronto and wants to fundraise from any Jewish person, they have to have this letter that says the tzedakah board has verified that they truly need the money. So this way you don't have to do the investigation. Now, if somebody comes to you and says, I need money, you say, hey, let me see your letter. If they don't have a letter, you could say, go get a letter. Right? If you're worried that they're going to literally be starving from hunger, you're allowed to give them water, food, of course. But if you're giving them money, you can say, go to that board. They're here to help. They're not here to make your life miserable. They just want to make sure that you're not scamming people.
Well, what happened to those guys who were dressed like real religious?
They're still in town. I saw them in the pizza store a couple weeks ago.
So they didn't ever find out who they are?
They said their mission, the investigation was they're not Jewish, and they started dressing up like Jews. But they weren't fundraising, by the way. That was never their issue. No. They were acting like Jews. They're part of a shul, and they blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, and they do everything. But they have no background in the sense of the investigation that show they come from the Jewish. No yichus, good word. They have no Jewish lineage or proof that they've ever converted. That's what yichus is. That was a good word, by the way. But we'll end on that note. That could be its own conversation.
Yes.
Tracing lineage.